She's
We
live.
don't necessarily need the full play-by-play.
Okay. Would you like me to chat to people and say we may have stream problems today?
Well, don't now.
Now
they know.
you've announced it.
I mean, it's green. We're still green. We're
Okay,
good.
we're gonna give it a go.
All right.
Okay.
1 out of every 20, 25, we have issues,
Yes.
and
Well,
it's usually when I'm here is when the issues happen.
Well,
Really?
the last time I was supposed to be here, you guys got stuck in traffic on the interstate, and I got up early. It was summer, dressed, ready, did my hair.
Trust me, I would have rather been where you were than where we were.
Yeah, we were.
2 hours in traffic and right in the dead zone where we don't get service for like a mile.
There were lots of people getting angry around us.
It was mostly me.
Were people were people getting out of their cars?
No, but they were turning around and some were just going down the shoulder. Other were trying to go through the median, and it was very wet. And then there was people that were stuck. From
They
trying
actually
to get
went through the cutouts in the highway that like cops will go hide in and stuff.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
the grassy.
Like turnarounds that you're
Like
not
literally,
supposed to
they
use.
went into like Jurassic Park and drove off into the other lane. We're like, oh, okay, see ya. You're not gonna go to work today, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I would have done. You're not going to get to work anyway.
You get to a point where you're just like, I'll do anything to get out of this.
Yes.
But then
Guess-
you realize that's just not a good idea because you're probably going to get stuck in the
Guess who's in the chat?
Jake.
Jake's there.
Hi, Jake.
Good morning. We were talking a little bit about, you were saying that you've been reading the whole Josh Harris or
Yeah.
Joshua Harris and
What's
Marty.
the other guy? Marty
something
Yeah.
or other.
I wasn't super familiar with him.
One guy's a Hillsong.
I think that's what it was. Yeah. So a couple prominent Christian leaders have kind of stepped out recently and said that they are giving up what they thought was true and kind of walking away from it. And I think that's a pretty powerful stance. I think Christianity in itself is trying to kind of scramble and find reasoning for why people are doing this.
Well, I've been watching a lot.
Yeah, where are you landing?
I've been watching a lot of videos from different perspectives. I watched this one guy who's like an ex-pastor, now turned atheist, and he's evaluated the whole thing. And then I watched like these super Christian people that are evaluating the whole thing.
Yeah, I've kind of read commentary on
So
both sides.
it's really interesting to kind of watch both parties doing that. And then also Mike D put out a whole statement about
Yes,
it.
which I actually thought was
From 10th Avenue North,
yeah,
the
was
lead singer.
well written.
Yeah.
As far as really hitting the point of we have to love them anyway. Like you can't
be
like
kind.
wherever they are in their process. Like it's not our job to fix it. It's our job to just still be kind and treat. Like if we want people to actually see Christ and want to be part of Christianity, which I think is mostly not the way people view Christianity anymore, then like to be hateful for people who are
Yeah.
struggling is just
It's weird.
exactly the opposite of what we should be doing.
Yeah. But, it is interesting because these guys weren't super big. I mean, Josh, he wrote that book.
Okay,
I
yeah.
Kissed Dating Goodbye when he was 21.
I was going to say, that was like,
And he
okay,
was-
so if
and he was
anyone grew up in our
homeschooled.
era,
Sorry, Rita.
Did you say he was homeschooled?
I'm sorry.
Listen,
We were one step
we were,
beyond
okay, we were
homeschool.
barely out of the homeschool realm.
I
of
know what
being
you
at
mean by
private
that,
school.
though. It's okay. It's not offensive.
So this guy,
Homeschoolers are
Joshua
weird.
Harris, he wrote a book called I Kissed Dating Goodbye. And it was extremely prominent in like our youth time.
Yeah.
And it was basically that don't date for fun. You court a woman to marry her only, kind of was, I believe, right? I don't
Yeah.
know that I read it, which is weird.
It was just in the...
It just was the culture.
Yeah.
You just knew that that's what it was.
Yeah. well, they didn't want... and he was real big on like not kissing his wife until they were married, like on his
was
wedding.
he that guy?
I'm pretty
forgot.
sure.
I forgot about that.
So
I forgot
that
that
was-
was a thing.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I mean, that whole... and then for him to come out later and he's basically apologized for the book, saying,
Yeah.
if you were hurt by this, if this, damaged you in some way, I'm really sorry about that.
Yeah, he apologized. I believe he's going through a divorce. So I think that's kind of what started his deconstruction, was like, well, this didn't work. And now I've like told the world, well, the Christian culture,
Right.
that this is the way you should do things, and it doesn't work. Like it didn't work for him. It doesn't work in general.
Well,
it's
I
not.
mean,
It's
you're
not that it
taking
doesn't
advice,
work.
You're
It's-
taking advice from a 21-year-old
Yeah,
who
but
had
I got
like
married at 21.
no
so.
life experience.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
So you can't, that was the culture that it was, is that was, you were looking for a spouse at 20, 21, 18. Like, I mean, that was kind of
is
where we were.
interesting.
Why is that a thing in the Christian world? Maybe this is a great topic. Like, why do people feel like they have to get married so young?
Because you're not, oh, go ahead.
I think that it has a lot to do with our parents' generation, though, because mom and dad got married when they were super young, like 20, 21, and right?
Dad was 19.
19.
Whoa.
Yeah. And so you got to imagine.
And they
like,
only knew each other a year. They dated for 6 months, were engaged for 6 months.
it was
they
a
got
different time, you know, and they've been together
43.
200 years,
married. 240.
240 years. So there is a certain thing where you go, oh, my parents did this and they have a
Right, and
loving
it works.
relationship.
Yeah, it works for
So
them.
let's do that.
No, see, my take on it is sex.
Okay.
You're not allowed to have sex before you're married. If you are, you're sinning, you're guilty. And so you are skirting around that issue by getting married as soon as possible so that you're not guilty if you want to have sex.
I'm not going to comment on that.
I mean, I have heard that.
I'm going to plead the fifth on that and move right past it.
Well, I mean, think about it though. If you're like really not going to get married until your 30s,
No, I think you're
like,
right,
you
yeah.
know, I mean, that's or if you're in a long-term relationship with someone, you're basically going, you know, in that culture, you need to be married in order to feel okay and not guilty about having sex with your partner. And so you're rushing that moment as fast as possible in order to have the paperwork that says you're not guilty anymore.
But is that healthy to be like, it's not okay and now it's okay? Like psychologically?
No, there's oh my goodness. There was a podcast that Anita sent me. Did you ever watch that or listen to it, I guess?
I don't think so.
It was about purity, and it was about the purity movement and how damaging it was in our youth, and how like we, you know, were drilled these things of like purity and purity and purity, and how like the psychological effects sexually are tremendous for our generation that went through that, because you can't just have a piece of paper and then have everything that you've been told was wrong suddenly
Right.
be okay. Like it just doesn't work that
if
way.
you spend your whole life abstaining from something and saying, I'm not going to do
wrong,
that,
it's
I'm
wrong,
not going
it's
to do that.
wrong.
Right.
And yeah, it doesn't make any sense that at the flip of a switch, you sign one piece of paper and you stand up in front of
Yeah.
people. Now it's all okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Now it's celebrated, and your psyche doesn't.
It doesn't work that
It doesn't
way.
Catch up
transition
with
like
it.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's crazy.
So then what would your advice be? What do you do?
You can plead the fifth. I did not expect to come on and talk about sex with
Oh yeah, did we establish that we're
with this group
siblings?
of- this group of people.
What
This is
you
my sister Stacy and my wife over here. Chris is back there just cringing in the dark.
He really is.
we
It's
can, we can move on.
Yeah, let's get back to kind of the Josh Harris,
Yeah.
Marty guy thing. I can't remember the guy's name. I'm
I
sorry.
know.
And I feel bad for these guys because there's just so much that's coming for them. And it'll be a couple of weeks and people will move on to their next thing to be upset about.
Yeah.
But inside of the Christian community, there's just been so much like,
Well, and once you're like
Outrage.
deemed a heretic or whatever in the Christian community, like there's really no coming back from that, as you know, we know
sure.
from what we've lived. And you know, you and I have, along with our family and our community here, have really gone through some significant deconstruction as far as standard
Well,
Christianity.
Let's talk about deconstruction. Is that a word that it's now entered kind of the Christian realm, I believe? Is this a word that's been around for a long time? It seems somewhat new.
I'm not sure. I mean, I think
Had you ever heard it before, Chris?
Deconstruction
Yeah, is that a thing that you...
in psychology.
Okay. So,
in psychology.
fair enough. I think that
Thank you.
there's
Wise Chris.
there's something to be said about the process of deconstruction or about beliefs in general.
Yes.
And I think that one thing that we found in 2016 especially, not just here, but just with the political culture and like everything was raised to this crazy point where everybody stopped talking and they stopped being okay with having differences, and there became these lines drawn in the sand. I mean, this morning we were talking about somebody that I remember them saying, or basically feeling like, if you don't think Hillary Clinton is crooked and should be in jail, you're evil. Like, you're a bad person. And then I had other friends that thought, if you don't think that Trump is the worst racist that's ever lived, you're evil. And it's like, how have we gotten to this part where am I supposed to go?
Right.
You know, you have to basically sacrifice somebody on either side.
Right. You have to choose which evil you're going to stand against and which one you're going to stand with, basically.
It's wild. And it wasn't just in the political sphere, obviously it was in the Christian sphere, but I just feel like that was kind of a turning point in my world, my reality, where people would just leave you based on mouth noises that didn't agree with your mouth noises.
Yeah.
Because these are all just ideas.
Or not even mouth noises, text messages, papers I didn't write that they think I agree with, and now we're not friends anymore. Like just
it's
bizarre
just
stuff like that.
It's weird when you get away from the relationship itself being the most important thing.
Right.
Where you say, I'm going to sacrifice this relationship for this thought, for this idea, for this belief.
At the time, it's not even like that's your solid, I'm going to stick to this belief forever. It's like, this is what I'm thinking right now.
Well, okay, but here's the question. And this is something that I've been thinking about a lot, and we're supposed to do a podcast on it today. Should your beliefs change?
Yes.
Okay. Are there any beliefs that shouldn't change? This is the stumper. I've asked many people this.
I know. I like seeing Stacy's gears turning. Let's just give her a moment here. We'll just sit here and look at each other while you think, because I want to know your answer. Yeah.
I'm like kind of trying to brainstorm of what I could latch onto that I'd be like, don't change that belief.
Like a belief that you say this one, despite any new evidence, because that's kind of my whole thing on belief in general.
Right. As you learn and grow, you should shift.
We know that the food pyramid now is kind of not the best way to eat.
Sugar should not be included.
It should not be included in one of the things. So based on the good evidence that we have, we should shift those beliefs. And honestly, diet, still the jury's out as far as what the best way to eat. And it depends a lot on your
body.
And your body and your DNA and how you're made up. So there's no one great answer. So you have to look at all the evidence and continue to change that belief about how you should eat, probably forever. I mean, or until we come into something that says, hey, for sure, this is the best diet for you or whatever. So we do that with diet and we think that's good, but we don't necessarily do that with beliefs. So back to the initial question. Hopefully that gave you some time to think. Is there a belief that you should never change?
I can't think
even
of
if new
one.
evidence came.
I can't think of one.
Okay.
I mean, I fundamentally try to believe and choose to believe that, people ultimately are doing the best they can. I think that's something we've talked about recently. And I don't know that I had verbalized it or articulated it in that phrase until our vacation this summer when you were talking about that. But yeah, ultimately, even in working with families at school and, students and children, I don't ever think that kid fundamentally is a bad kid. You know what I mean? Like, no, their behavior is a symptom of something else, and it's always they're doing the best they can. So something's disrupting them to make them be like this, know? And so, I mean, that's kind of a foundational one. But even with that, I feel like, if all of a sudden the world shifted and evil took over and I had experiences that showed me like this person is not doing the best they can,
right?
Then I think that even then I could shift belief a little bit.
I think the whole idea, and this is kind of a Brene Brown thing, which is assuming that people are doing the best they can,
right?
Acting like they're doing the best they can serves you and them more than assuming that they're not.
Right.
So even if they're not doing the things that you think are the best for them or for you or the people around them, it is better for you to act like they're doing the best they can than to act like they're not. And so it's a very kind of big concept boiled down into one quick statement, but we had a lot of discussion about that
we had our own personal coffee talks.
We did.
On vacation.
Yeah.
Ryan, you didn't really talk about you have a great answer to that.
Oh, so you want me to flip the question back to you? Did I miss my cue?
I mean, I just want to see if maybe you agree with.
Well, my one thing, and it's funny Chris is here because we've had lengthy debates over this one thing that I think is a foundational belief that
now he's just
that
sitting in the dark
shouldn't
judging
be
you.
changed. No, that's okay. And that belief, despite even if there was good evidence to say this is not true, I think this is something that is foundational to kind of everything, and everything kind of works off of it. That people are made in God's image. That's the very Christian way of saying it. Mm-hmm. But really what it is, and a political way of saying it, is that we're all created equal. That there's some sort of unalienable right.
There's value in life.
Inalienable? Unalienable.
Inalienable.
Aliens.
alienable,
Sorry.
right? That we have some sort of dignity as a human and a value that's inherent that you can't get away from.
You tried to debate that with me at the Shanks house in the pool at a birthday party last year.
Whoa, that's specific.
And there was a dog floating on a raft.
I remember that.
Do you
actually.
remember that?
I do. Was I debate? Which side was I debating that from?
I don't know. I think I gave up before you got to your point.
That sounds about right. Nobody wants.
I was like, we're at a party.
Just swim away.
But I think that if you lose that, then everything else falls apart.
I agree with that. My main issue with even that thought process is, how did you get there? You had to have some growth and movement to establish that that's where you land. So even with that belief, there has to be some growth that comes first.
Yeah. Well, I think the reason I landed on that was because I kept pushing down and saying, okay, that belief could change. That belief could change. And you have to have something grounding. You have to have something at the bottom or else everything is just relative to whatever else. So
I kind of have always kind of my grounding. I mean, I do believe that every human has value. And, but I think my grounding point is just love. Like, if you are doing something that shows love or kindness, that's what good is. So
but what if you're showing love to someone and kindness to someone, and that's ultimately aiding in their destruction?
Enabling them. Yes.
Yeah.
No.
Or toxic charity, or however you want to put it.
I think then it's not really love.
Okay.
How can you tell?
I was going to say, I don't know if this is the place to take this conversation all the way to the bottom, because this is not a quick conversation, nor is it one that's going to be super interesting. It's going to be really technical and aggravating.
I mean, you guys seem to be very good at coming up with ways of thinking to arrive at a good conclusion or a good spot. So can you maybe talk about the method? Because you guys have very similar minds, which is why when you get into a debate, it's very interesting to watch, because you're like, ooh, what side are they going to be on?
And then it escalates, and
Yeah,
then I
it
cry,
always
and
does.
then he's mad. They did bring tissues for me today.
I've never seen that happen.
But can you guys talk about how it is that you think and how it is that you go about holding beliefs, like the method of thinking through things and being logical about things, even when emotions come out? Like, you guys, can you kind of talk about that?
Well, it's tough because I think that we both are willing to have long, drawn-out conversations, but we are both pretty passionate. I would say I'm passionate, and I would say you're emotional. Is that? I didn't mean that as a...
Where's the tissue?
You show much more...
I'm very emotional. I don't disagree with that at all. And I have a hard time sometimes when I get... Sorry, I just banged this. When I get really passionate, it comes out as emotion for me. And so that definitely is true, which is aggravating. And it's aggravating because you get really, really mad about it. Like I'm manipulating you.
Well,
and instead, which only makes you like more aggressive towards me, which only makes me more
only
crying.
when we're having a rational discussion, and then all of a sudden we've got this emotion in there we have to deal with. It's like,
you think I like it? I don't want to be crying in the middle of trying to prove my point. Like I wish I could just be like, and we're done with that.
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way. But when I'm really hyper passionate about things, then my emotional state really heightens with it, and it becomes harder for me to control that because it becomes almost out of control again for me. But overall, I usually can rein it in. I think part of our process, though, too, is that we are passionate in a moment when we're arguing about something, but we also both take time after a discussion or a disagreement or something to think through what the other person has said and process it and kind of come around.
100%.
I think we do that well in our family in general. I think we do well with just kind of, sorry, is that you or me?
I don't know. Keep going.
It's you.
It's my tire guy.
I'm like, everything's shaking. I don't know what's going on. I think Dad has modeled that very well for us. And Mom actually too. Mom is, she takes a little longer to process things.
Sure.
But overall, I think in our family, when we have disagreements, we're very good about going through kind of our own process at the end of it and coming back around to relationship is more important, even if we disagree.
Yes.
Seeing each other's perspective for what it is. Again, we don't have to agree, but
and changing your mind.
We do. We do change our minds.
I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've gotten into an argument with Dad over who's the pastor, if you don't know. It's terrible claim to fame, but that's what we have.
That's where we are.
And we'd have a long, drawn-out conversation or argument even about anything from
About one word. Sometimes.
theology. Yeah, one word, multiple times. And the next day, he'll come back and he'll call me. He'll make a point to call me or to find me and say, thought a lot about what you were saying, and here's where I think that you're right. Like, often that happens. And what a thing to behold, your father coming to you and saying, hey, we argued about that. I argued hardcore, and I think that you're actually right on this thing. And
Yeah.
he does that all the time. It's like he doesn't mind.
Yeah, for as smart as he is and as wise as he is in so many areas, he's very humble about rethinking things. And I think he's taught us to do that. And I think that's one of the reasons that we don't hold on to stagnant doctrine and beliefs that are no longer what evidence is showing us. You know, I think in our family, we're able to let go of those things and move forward to better ideas and bettering ourselves and bettering the world around us because we're open to the evidence and shifting that mindset.
Yeah, I don't know if I go that far.
You don't think you better the world around you?
We'll see. Time will tell.
You're a great cat dad.
I am a great cat dad. But other than that, I don't know how that's bettering the world. The lizard population has been going.
You're a hero to the
I
lizards,
save
let me
so
tell
many
you.
lizards.
Every day,
Yeah.
he's got a lizard in a napkin. He's just saving it.
You have
Cat catches them, I save them,
like,
throw them
yeah, I just had
outdoors.
this picture of Gandhi with like a napkin.
No, it's,
That's the
it's
cat's
Ryan.
name. Yeah. So, but I also think that when it comes to talking through beliefs, and this isn't just theological beliefs, by the way. I'm talking like broad scope.
Oh, yeah. I mean, in my world, it's
we haven't-
educational stuff, you
yeah,
know?
we're not touching on just like, oh, this is how you view Christianity or God or anything like that. Although that's definitely a part of it. But I think that one of the things in the area of religion or in the area of a theological kind of framework, what I've been really spending a lot of time and energy on in the last couple of years is trying to take these concepts that chafe me, that annoy me, that I say, where is the practical benefit in that motif? I'm a believer that if something's said a lot in culture and people don't generally know what it means, that it has some sort of deep resonance and it means something valuable to people. So I like looking at the generic kind of statements or the platitudes or anything that somebody would just say that seems to be thrown around easily. Cliches. And I like to try to bring them into a practical framework, something that says, does this benefit you or not? And if it doesn't, let's stop saying it. But is there a bridge to take something that's cliche and turn it into something valuable so that when I hear it, I don't cringe, but I go, oh, I know what you're talking about. I just have to define that for myself in some way.
Yeah, I definitely have done that. More specifically, I'd say in the Christian world, because, you know, we get all these cliches that kind of come out, and honestly, a lot of them are fairly damaging in the way that they're said. And so you almost, but you know, I can't
See,
go
that's
around.
where I disagree. I think that a lot of them, okay, keep going. I'm sorry. I got to remember I'm live on the internet. And I can come off as a little bit of a, what's the word?
Where's our bleep button?
No, I think that they are damaging because they point to God being evil without people realizing that they're personifying God as more of an evil entity, because they're pointing to him as, well, he's da 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 and he's da 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 da, and I cringe at that because, you know, I think that they're putting a lot on God that is inappropriate. But it's almost like in my head, I have to reframe what they're saying. Again, going back to, I believe they're doing the best that they can.
Mm-hmm.
And so even when they're saying it from a place of, I want to comfort you and I want to help you and I want to, you know, identify with you and give you what I can, even though I think it's flawed significantly and somewhat harmful to put those thoughts into someone else's head.
Yeah, I guess we'd have to get more specific in order to take them apart. But
Yeah.
before doing that, I do want to say I disagree slightly, because I think that those things that are said so off the cuff and are used to comfort people in times of hurt or trouble or whatever.
Do you have a specific example?
Everything happens for a reason.
Yeah, that's a good one. Like, well, everything, you know, this is all part of God's plan. That's kind of a thing that people say when you're going through something tough. And I think that does have some problems in it for sure, because it creates a bunch of questions and like, well, why would God then give, you know, this kid cancer and allow them to suffer, and they did nothing wrong. Like, how is that? Well, this other person may hear about, well, that's not enough justification for me, and it creates all these other issues. And I get that. But I do think that there's a certain aspect of that that is really, really helpful in people feeling like they're not at a total, that there's only chaos, that there's no order. And, if you go to like a Jordan Peterson kind of framework, which is not his framework. I mean, it's
right. It's chaos and order.
It's a mythological framework, but there's this certain amount of chaos and this certain amount of order. And that constantly we're trying to work between them to turn the chaos into the order. And I think that's what that statement tries to do. It says there's too much chaos and we need to make some sort of order out of this. Therefore, if God has some sort of divine plan for all of this, then it's no longer me floating through the chaos and just totally being blown apart.
But do you
and
think
I think that's okay.
You think
that doesn't bug me?
See, I still think it's problematic, because I understand the concept of trying to find order within the chaos. I don't think it needs to be that. I think it's much more healthy to come alongside someone whose child, is diagnosed with cancer and is struggling. I think it's much more useful to come alongside them and be like, I'm here and it feels chaotic. I understand, but I'm next to you and I'm going to hold your hand and we're going to walk through it together. Like, how much more helpful is that than to be like, there's some cosmic plan that your child should die?
Depends
like,
who you
I
are.
don't think
Depends
that
who you are
works
and,
for me.
And well, it may not work for you. And it may be one of those things that if somebody said to you, it would be aggravating. But I think that at the same time, to say that has no merit and no value to anyone is just not true. In fact, I would say that the good, for the most part, outweighs the bad. Because, I mean, here's the thing. There are categories of things that we can know, things we can't know. That falls into a category of things you can't know. I mean, you can make a philosophical argument for it, but you can't know what God's divine plan is or whether it exists or not. You just can't know. Like, if you could just know that, then you would know the mind of God, or you'd be somehow like omniscient. Like, you can't. It's in a category over there. So to argue against it is a little intellectually dishonest as well, because it's not something that's really falsifiable. It's not something that you can just say, that's not true. You can make a philosophical argument against it, but you can't necessarily say that this is like objectively a true statement kind of thing.
Okay. I mean, I think that it doesn't match. I mean, if you have a view of God and you're making a statement that doesn't correlate with that, then your worldview is disrupted. You're almost creating more chaos because you're believing that a God is good, and then you're also saying, but maybe God gave that 2-year-old cancer.
Right, but then the response would be, but he works all things for his good. So
I think that good can come out of any negative circumstances, but you cannot say that he caused.
You can. It just may be wrong.
It doesn't match.
Yes, and so that what you're trying to.
You're creating more chaos for me.
What you're creating is cognitive dissonance. You're creating this disjointedness in your own mind where you're speaking out of both ends of your mouth. Is that a phrase?
I think so. Yeah.
Both sides of your face or something like that.
Both nose holes.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, that's a problem for sure. But I think there's bigger problems than that.
Of course, there are bigger problems than that.
In certain levels and time frames of.
And I don't think it's healthy. I mean, I know a lot of people who believe a lot of different things theological, and they make comments to me about end of the world, God's plan, Satan, whatever, all the time. Mm-hmm. And that's fine, because it's where they are right now. And I don't correct them. I mean, unless you're asking me my opinion on your theological statements, I'm going to go, yep, and move on, because right now that's what you need in your platitude, and I'm not going to go against it.
Even in saying not correct them, what you've assumed is that you have the correct position.
Ooh.
But I do.
Okay, fair enough.
No, you're right. That was not the wisest way to say it, because if I can't say I'm correct, because I continue, like you said, to update my worldview and my belief system with new evidence and new experiences and all kinds of things. So where I am now, that is not. I don't think it's helpful, and I think it's harmful, but it's not my place in that moment to be like, I think this is harmful for you, because where they are is not a place to really acknowledge that yet.
Sure.
So.
Yeah. I think it is harmful in one way, but I think taking it away becomes harmful in another.
If they're not, I mean, and I agree with you to the effect of that is if they are not ready to let go. Deconstruction, that word we talked about earlier,
I don't know how I feel about that word.
Buzzword.
It's painful. It's a painful process to go through. And people who want to, and when you are in a place where you have to start examining the building blocks of your belief and your worldview, you realize sometimes that they don't align and that something here and there may be wrong or needs to be adjusted. And that is very painful. And so what happens a lot of times, I feel like, is people start going, nope, won't look at it at all. Because if I examine too closely, it's too painful.
Well, do you think that that is something that everybody should be doing? We had this argument last week as well.
Yes and no, because I don't think everyone's ready. And I think I think you could create a place where someone can sink so far into chaos that they can't see the good and the hope anymore, almost, by pulling apart where they were holding on to good and hope. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I would say that for people that claim deconstructionism or, I've let go of certain beliefs, that's what it means. It means I've evaluated what I actually think.
What was
I've
constructed
I've
as
read
a
some
worldview,
books
I've kind of broken down
and then
I've
tried to
examined and rebuilt
put it back. But I would say more often than not, the people that I know that have deconstructed, it hasn't been helpful to them.
It's been helpful to me.
Sure. But you're not more often than not.
I'll give an example of where it could be, and I think you were touching on that when you have hope and peace and whatever the good things that come along with having a sturdy belief, if you deconstruct, you can lose that. You can lose what you had before where you felt better about life, or you woke up in the morning and felt like, I'm watched over. I'm good. I'm good to go.
And I know something, you
Right.
know, that feeling of like, I'm confident and I know something. And when you have to let go of that and go, I hope this, or I think that, or currently I'm here with this thought.
But
like,
I think that's why it's important to come into this knowing that there are certain categories of things, like things you can't know. You cannot know, and I'm going to use God's divine plan. You cannot know that there is a divine plan for your life. You can choose to act like that's true and to say that that's true or not. You get to make that choice if you work hard enough at it. Which is better? Is it better to choose that unknowable thing and say, I have faith that there is a divine plan for things, or to say, there's not enough evidence to support that, therefore I'm not going to believe that, or there's a philosophical issue here, so therefore I'm not going to support that.
I think on the issue of God's plan, sometimes I think that it's almost a cop-out. Well, if it's God's plan, it'll work out if it's God's plan. Well, no, it might work out if you put in the work and you struggle through it. Well, if it's God's plan, I'll get my doctorate degree. No, it'll be me registering for classes and me doing the coursework and me sacrificing other things in my life in order to get to the end goal I want to get to.
I agree with you on that for sure. But I'm saying that if you lose that part where you think that there is something, a lot of what you lose, as well as this meaning that comes along with it, I feel like. I think there's a trade-off. And there's a dark side to over deconstructing too much too quick, or not having the time to read things and put back pieces as you go. You don't just want to level something out and say, I have no belief system now. I'm completely void of all this. And
that's where you go in too far into chaos that it's very hard to pull back out. And I think that, we were lucky again in some of our deconstruction to have the community around us where we had a lot of sounding boards to talk through a lot of our thoughts through it. We had good resources of people putting books and podcasts in our hands to have different opinions and kind of piece together the things that we could still hold on to. And of course, Dad just kind of standing tall going, but still Jesus, like he showed us to love and include people. And that's what I've modeled my whole life for you. And that's what Jesus modeled for us. And that's where we're headed. Yeah. And so it gave us almost like a North Star to keep going towards, even when we were crumbling everything else. And I don't think that a lot of people who have grown up in a somewhat damaging Christian culture who need to deconstruct have those kind of touch points. Yeah. And so our experience is different.
Well, it's also very different because of the school we grew up with.
Right.
And I went there for 11 years. How many years were you there?
10, I believe.
Which was super hardcore, like fundamentalist Christian, like the hardest core
like chapel once a week where they were banging the Bible and
they
looking
scared
at you in the eye. And if you were not making eye contact, that pastor would come over and bang his Bible in your face and be like, look at me. I mean, that's when
kicking
like
people
when
out
you're
of
6,
chapel for not
7,
looking at
8
them.
years old, you
Yeah.
know, you're sitting through this every week.
5,
And-
kindergarten.
Yeah, kindergarten and up.
Yeah.
And, you know, you're sitting there just terrified to not be engaged and to not know what's going on because they'll call you on it. But just, you know, I mean, everything was, this is wrong and 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 you will burn forever. So if you don't want to burn forever, you better not even think of a cuss word.
Yeah.
Because you will literally be tortured for all eternity.
I remember being really concerned that I would be on my way to a car, like in the midst of a car wreck, and then a curse word would go through my head because of the sheer, you know, craziness of the experience. And that because of that, I'd be in hell forever.
Yeah.
And I think it's important for people to understand when you guys talk about damaging beliefs, this is the basis of it.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
not just like
Yes.
the docile stuff.
It's not like you went to church on the weekends as a kid
Right.
and had some Sunday school.
This
This is an
real.
intense
Right.
scenario. And this was things like, you know, because it's funny because we didn't know when we were kids that we both were having fears of that. Mine was much more before I went to bed at night. I would think, what if I have a thought that's disobedient? What if I have a thought that's wrong in some way and I die in my sleep? And I would be scared to go to sleep because I was afraid I would die in my sleep and I would have thought something wrong and then I would go and I would be tortured for all of eternity. And, you know, so when you live in that fear for so long, you realize how damaging it is. And I think that's why I have such a knee-jerk reaction to certain Christian
Sure.
things too, is
I
because
get
I'm
it.
like, that's damaging. Don't say that. Don't do that. Like but you're right. I mean, some people it does help to an extent. We've been on the receiving end of so much damage of it through that experience.
Well, I think that too, like getting to this point, the way that I remedy a lot of that damage is by, and Brett says this all the time, but he didn't create this either, but looking at it for what it is, like looking at reality for what it is. Look at those situations and those things that happened for what they were and really try to make the most sense of them as possible. And for me, it's not making the most sense in trying to debunk them. I think there was a time in my life where that was kind of my draw, was trying to, you know, pull everything apart and be like, look, this is ridiculous and here's why.
Yeah, you're wrong.
You're wrong and I'm
Yeah.
right. I think that more so now it's about trying to build a bridge and say, why is that a thing?
Right.
And where's the benefit in that? What's
Yeah.
the practical application of that?
I think that even the writing that you recently sent me about the word surrender really illustrated that for me. And that is something I've done myself. Like you said, like even some Christian quotes, I kind of like on the surface, I wouldn't agree with them. But if I go into my own mind and I say, okay, I'm not viewing it through that damaging lens anymore. I'm going to view it through this, where it's, you know, the spirit behind it is more this, and I can get on board with it. So for surrender, to kind of give background, you know, which is something I've struggled with too, but you had messaged me last week, I think it was, or 2 weeks ago, that a new song we did talked about surrender, and you kind of wrote up this concept of having a hard time with surrender. You want to give a little more detail on what that was? Because I can't quote it.
Yeah, sure.
Go.
I'm supposed to meet Rick at 9:00. It's already 9:03.
Actually, Rick did talk about it this weekend. in
He
his
did. Yeah,
training
I
show.
sent it to him as well, and Evan a little bit. But the idea was, it was really trying to remedy the whole take personal responsibility for your life and go out and do as Jesus did. Side note, this is another thing that really happened growing up in kind of a fundamentalist evangelical school, not church. This is what's weird. We didn't have that at church. We only had that at school.
Yeah.
Anyway.
It was bizarre.
So we got to learn a lot from different perspectives.
We were actually
growing up.
taught almost to be critical of doctrine and Christianity at some point kind of in our youth, because we had to pick apart things
Yes.
that didn't match from school, home,
Right.
and church even.
Yeah, it was weird.
So
But all of that, oh no, I'm losing it.
Do you want to do a podcast about surrender? Because I do feel like it's a pretty lengthy thing to lay out, and it's great. Like what you wrote out, that thought process is good. We are a little over 9:00, so I'm just wondering if maybe if people are interested in that, they could.
If you're interested,
Find it
leave a
somewhere.
comment and we'll come back and do it again.
yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can't not be at the meetings today. I'm sorry.
That's fine. Before I go, my kids this morning were excited that I was going to be on Coffee Talk.
This is probably the most boring coffee talk in the world for them.
them.
So I'm going to real quick give a shout out to Colin Peyton Brady. Peyton really wanted me to say that she's my favorite girl in the whole world and that I love her so much and the boys. So there you go. Now she can watch the last 10 seconds and be happy.
Very,
They're going to be
very
like,
cute.
Mommy, you came on this podcast and Uncle Ryan did all the talking.
Yeah, I know.
I'm sorry.
Didn't talk about myself at all, really.
Actually, it was great. We had some comments in here. There's let me cut to my third shot. There are great comments in here, and a few people were saying this was a great topic for debate, and they're very interested in this. So
We
it's
do
good.
like to debate.
It's true.
Well, do you want to?
That's it.
That's it.
Okay.
All right.
9:05. I'm late for my meeting.
Hold on.
I got to get back to work.